I used to think that silence in a family meant peace, that the absence of conflict was enough to prove belonging. The flyer showed up on Lauren's Facebook page on a Thursday morning. I saw it by accident. The banner at the top read, "Family Weekend at the Whitmore House," centered over a stock image of lemonade pitchers and gingham blankets. There were names tagged below: Grant, Aunt Diane, the cousins from Seattle, even Uncle Bill, who hadn't been back since Mom's stroke. But my name wasn't there! I looked again, scrolled, refreshed the page. Nothing. It wasn't a mistake. The caption was cheerful. "Can't wait to see everyone under one roof again." There were emojis, hearts, a sun, a picnic basket. The tone was just right. Public enough to be proud. Private enough to exclude. I didn't message her. I didn't comment. That afternoon, I called the house. 4 rings, then my mother picked up. Her voice was firm-clipped the way it got when she was already rehearsed. "Claire, maybe you should take time for yourself this year. There's no need to come." She didn't say there wasn't room. She didn't say it was an oversight. She didn't ask how I was. The call didn't end in anger. It ended in the kind of quiet that doesn't wait for agreement. I didn't pack. I didn't ask again. But on Saturday I drove past the house, not because I wanted to go inside, just to see if it was real. The cars were parked in the gravel, like they always had been, lined shoulder to shoulder, with one tire always half in the hydrangeas. Grant's SUV was near the front. There was a rental van too, and folding chairs spread across the lawn. I saw white paper lanterns strung under the porch rail, swaying slightly in the breeze. Someone had painted a wooden sign in script, "Family is forever." It leaned against the mailbox. I didn't slow down, but I didn't speed up either. Someone's laugh carried through the hedge. It might have been Lauren's, or it might not have. I kept my windows closed. Back at the apartment, I made coffee, the kind I keep in a tin, the kind that always tastes slightly burnt, no matter how I brew it. I poured it into my mother's old ceramic mug, the one she left behind in a box I unpacked 2 years late. I sat at the table and opened my laptop. The inbox was ordinary: a bank statement, a student update, a junk promotion for windshield wipers, and one flagged email marked "important" from a real estate firm I hadn't worked with in years. RE update. Whitmore House. Transfer completed. I clicked it, read the first sentence, then the second. My name was no longer on the deed. I called the office to confirm. The woman who answered was polite, thorough. She found the file in under a minute. Yes, the transfer had been finalized 6 months ago. Yes, both Thomas and Evelyn Whitmore had signed. Yes, Grant Whitmore had assumed sole ownership of the property under legal authority. "Do you need a copy of the documentation?" she asked. I didn't respond right away. My fingers hovered over the trackpad. I looked at the mug beside me. The coffee had cooled, forming a pale ring along the edge untouched. "No," I finally said. "I think I already have one." When the call ended, I opened the desk drawer. Near the back, under a bundle of loose paper clips and a dried pen, there was a manila envelope. Inside, my copy of the original co-ownership agreement. My name printed clearly above my father's signature. The date circled, the notary's stamp firm in the corner. I had been in uniform that day. My second deployment had just ended. Mom made a casserole. Dad wore his dress shoes. Grant had handed me the pen, grinning like he was proud. They said it was the least they could do. I folded the paper and returned it to the drawer. Next to it was a birthday card from 6 years ago. Pale blue, no glitter. The handwriting was my mother's. "Love you. Claire, keep doing your best." No signature, no message inside, just that one sentence. That year I had sent a photo home, me standing beside the general commendation in hand sand, still in my boots. No one replied to the email. I'd kept the card anyway. I kept everything. I pulled it out now, held it in my palm. The paper was soft at the corners. I didn't open it. I just held it. Sometimes the body recognizes betrayal before the mind can label it. The stillness in the room wasn't peace, it was absence. There had been no warning, no conversation, just a missing tag, a closed door, a signature, and a new banner. Family is forever. I looked at the screen again. The email sat there unmoved. Above me, the ceiling was blank, clean, a surface I had never really studied before. I sat up straight and stared at it. There was no anger, no story to rewrite, just a new line I hadn't planned for. Maybe it wasn't that they forgot me. Maybe they remembered exactly what they wanted to. I used to believe that effort counted for something. That if you did the right things quietly, the people around you would fill in the rest. When I moved back home after I left service, I folded my uniforms before placing them in the bottom drawer. Not because anyone asked me to, but because I didn't want the medals to rattle when someone passed by. I learned to cook the way my mother used to. Roasted chicken with lemon. Potatoes peeled too thin. I followed her method exactly, even set the table with the mismatched china she liked to save for guests. At dinner, she ran a finger along the rim of her plate. Too much salt. Your brother watches his blood pressure now. She didn't finish the meal. I offered to drive my father to his follow-ups after the minor stroke. He never looked out the window. At the pharmacy, he waited in the car. When the nurse asked for the emergency contact, he gave them Grant's number, not mine. "You're not here all the time," he said. "They need someone dependable." I nodded. I didn't remind him I was standing in front of her desk holding his prescription. Lauren brought the kids by once a week. I made space for their shoes, swept crumbs without comment. She sat at the kitchen island with a coffee cup she never rinsed. Connor's teacher says he's a natural leader. So intuitive, not forceful, just quietly in charge. She looked up at me like she meant something else. It's funny how some people don't need a uniform to prove it. I told her the banana bread was good. It wasn't. When Grant threw a surprise party for Dad's retirement, I helped in the kitchen. My mother asked me to stay inside so the guests wouldn't get confused about who organized what. I arranged the plates, washed each wine glass twice. When the cake came out, I stood by the sink watching through the window as the family posed near the garden. Grant stood in the center. His hand was on Mom's shoulder. Later, I found the photos in an album left on the coffee table, page after page of faces smiling at things I couldn't name. My name didn't appear once. No one offered to retake any of them. I bought a frame for Dad the week after. Solid oak beveled edges. I placed my bronze star in the center and left it on the mantel. By Sunday, it was gone. I found it in the garage behind a row of empty paint cans. It didn't match the room Mom said wiping a coaster clean. Besides, Grant's promotion plaque is already there. Two things would be clutter. I didn't move it again. That spring, the roof started leaking over the den. I brought it up at dinner. "I can cover half," I said. "Or more." Grant didn't look up from his phone. "It's already sorted. I talked to the contractor." I waited for Dad to speak. He tapped his fork against the rim of his plate. "Grant handles the house now," he said. "It's just simpler." There wasn't a moment, a rupture, a scene. It was more like air slowly leaking from a tire. Nothing loud, just the slow loss of structure. I tried other ways. I folded towels the way my mother preferred, twice lengthwise, once over. I complimented Lauren's book club, though she never asked what I was reading. I remembered anniversaries. I left space. There's a draft email I never sent. I wrote it during one of those nights when the house was too quiet and the clock ticked louder than it should have. It began, "I know I'm quiet sometimes, but I still care about being here." I stared at the blinking cursor for half an hour. I never hit send. The draft still sits in my inbox. I check it sometimes not to finish it, just to remind myself I once meant to say something. That year on my birthday, Grant gave Dad a new grill. Lauren brought a homemade pie. I received a pair of socks folded inside the department store bag they came in. "You're hard to shop for," Mom said. I thanked her anyway. I told myself these things didn't matter, that I hadn't come home for applause, that presence was enough. But presence without invitation begins to feel like intrusion. I learned to step lightly on the stairs, to close drawers without sound, to leave no trace in a house that no longer paused to welcome me. One afternoon I found Connor's school drawing pinned to the fridge. A stick figure family. 4 people. A house. A dog. No fifth shape. No uniform. No aunt. I made tea and watched the water roll in the kettle. I thought about finishing the email, about adding just one more sentence. But I didn't. Some part of me still believed that the small things counted, that a clean kitchen, a quiet gesture, a steady hand on the steering wheel might lead someone to say she's still part of this. But no one said it. And eventually even I stopped checking for signs. The email is still there, tucked between bills and airline confirmations. Sometimes I hover over the delete icon, not because I'm angry, just to solve how it feels. And every time I choose to leave it, not as proof of effort, but as proof that once I believed effort would be enough. I used to think memory was something everyone carried equally, like family silver passed from hand to hand. But some people only remember what flatters them. At my high school graduation, Grant got a wristwatch, leather band initials engraved, presented in a velvet box just before the ceremony. He stood tall for the photos tie, just loose enough to look intentional. "Something to mark the beginning of real responsibility," Dad said, adjusting the clasp like he was handing over a legacy. When I graduated 2 years later, I got a half hug in the hallway before we left for the auditorium. "You'll do fine," Mom said, then turned to remind Grant not to wrinkle his shirt for pictures. I don't remember if they took any of me. On my 17th birthday, there was a card. Glossy, gold-lettered, mass-printed. No note inside, just with love stamped in generic script. The envelope was sealed, but unmarked. No handwriting, no care. I kept it, anyway. During my first deployment, I sent home a photo. It wasn't official. Just me sunburned and squinting holding a small bronze medal I hadn't expected to receive. I emailed it to both my parents, unsure if they'd know what it meant. A week later, Dad called. "Don't let that go to your head. Just keep your head down and stay out of the papers." I learned to stop sending updates. In Syria, I found a stack of children's books in a UN drop-off. Some were bent pages torn, but they were in English. I packaged a few with a note. "Thought the girls might like these. They're simple stories." I pictured them reading under the porch light, voices stumbling over silly rhymes. 2 weeks later, Lauren mentioned it in passing while clearing salad plates. They came thanks, but Connor said the words were too big. Next time, just send stickers. No one ever said whether the books were kept. I asked once quietly, respectfully, if I could help manage Mom's finances. It was after her blood pressure scare, when Grant had missed the pharmacy pickup twice. I offered to take over the monthly schedule, organize the paperwork, cover the co-pays if needed. Mom folded her napkin slowly, eyes fixed on the seam. You've been gone so long, Claire. It's easier if someone here handles those things. That was the entire answer. I didn't offer again. The Christmas card from 3 years ago still sits in my desk drawer. A photo of the family posed beside the fireplace, everyone in coordinated sweaters. At the bottom, their names printed in bold font: Thomas, Evelyn, Grant, Lauren, Connor, Emily. No mention of me, not even a love from all of us. It wasn't mailed. Lauren had handed it to me during a grocery run. Oh, almost forgot. Here. I took it like it didn't weigh anything. There's also a note I kept. A scrap of yellow paper torn from the grocery pad. Claire, pick up milk. Mom. No date. No context. Just a list item. But the handwriting is unmistakable. Curved letters, the C in my name a little too tall. That might be the last thing she wrote with my name on it. I used to think these omissions were accidents. The missing seat at dinner, the absence of my name in the group text, the photo albums I was always behind the camera for never in. But memories have shape. They leave outlines. And after enough time, even the outlines go missing. Sometimes I catch myself imagining a different version of us. One where Mom says, "Tell me what it was like over there," instead of, "You don't need to talk about all that." One where Dad keeps my picture on his desk, not just Grant's framed family at the lake. One where I come home and someone says, "We missed your voice in the room." It's never been that version. I've learned to measure my place in objects, not words. The unframed commendation in the closet, the shelf of untouched books, the unopened birthday card, the note about milk, proof in reverse. There's a drawer I keep for these things, small, unimportant to anyone else. Paper that should have been thrown out years ago. Sometimes I open it and just look, not to remember what happened, but to prove that I didn't imagine it all. I don't know if they remember me as someone who tried, or if they remember me at all in the spaces that matter. When they light the tree, when they toast at New Year's, when someone asks how many siblings Grant has. Maybe I'm the sentence they never finish. I once asked Mom, during a quiet afternoon between doctor's visits, if she thought people could just disappear from a family. She folded laundry, her hands moving automatically. People drift. That's just life. I watched her match socks with perfect symmetry. None of them were mine. I closed the drawer this morning after rereading the note about milk. I didn't move anything inside. I didn't throw it away. I just let the silence sit and wondered, not for the first time, if they ever truly saw me in the first place. I always thought the deepest cuts would come with shouting. But the worst kind are typed in Times New Roman and served on letterhead. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday. I recognized the name of the firm before I opened it. Grant had used them before, clean branding, expensive paper, always folded crisply into thirds. My name was printed on the front, but not in handwriting. No one in the family had touched it. Inside the letter was short, 4 pages stapled in the top left corner. The language was clean, clinical. The defendant, Claire Whitmore, is alleged to have used undue influence deriving authority from her military background to manipulate and pressure her aging parents into asset control. A paragraph later, Said influence has resulted in demonstrable psychological distress to the plaintiffs, Thomas and Evelyn Whitmore, and the wrongful assertion of property claims no longer valid. Defendant. I reread that word 4 times, not because I didn't understand it, but because it looked strange beside my name. The last page included attachments, copies of documents, a printed photo. The photo caught me off guard. It was from a funeral. Military folded flag stone steps in the background. I was standing at parade rest uniform, pressed expression, unreadable. I remembered the weight of the beret in my hand. I remembered the silence that followed the bugle. The caption beneath the photo said Exhibit B demonstration of formal dominance pattern and symbolic presence. I had sent that image to no one in my family. Someone had searched for it, pulled it from a public archive, submitted it under oath. No one had warned me. Not Grant, not Lauren, not my parents. There was no call, no message, no pause. I checked my phone. No new texts. The family thread had been silent for weeks, unless someone needed a recipe or a ride to the airport. I thought about calling Mom. Then I remembered her voice the last time we spoke. Claire, things have gotten complicated. Grant's just trying to protect what matters. Protect, not defend, not explain. The phrase echoed flat and final. I laid the letter on the table, oak square-edged, the same one where I used to sort letters during basic training. I'd come home, hands still smelling of graphite and dust-spreading envelopes like a deck of cards. Most were from banks or departments, some from friends, one or two sometimes from home, always short. I folded the legal notice neatly and placed it beside the old drawer poor Dad had never fixed. One side tilted slightly now, a slant in the wood barely noticeable unless you knew where to look. No one had told me I was out of the family. They just shifted the furniture until I didn't have a chair. I remembered that funeral, the one in the photo. A friend. Good soldier. No local family. I'd driven 6 hours to stand in that row of 5 because no one else would. I didn't tell anyone I was going. I came home that night. No one asked where I'd been. I stared at the document again. The tone was sterile. Ms. Whitmore displayed a pattern of behavioral insistence and emotionally destabilizing proximity. I thought of the day I suggested setting up medical power of attorney for Mom. Her hands had trembled on the teacup, and Grant cut in before she could speak. Let's not overcomplicate things. You travel too much. Now it was evidence. My service, my presence, my request to be involved, they weren't gestures anymore. They were reinterpreted, categorized, filed under threat. There were no fingerprints on the paper, but the ink carried every omission. I picked up the photo again. The creases weren't mine. Someone had handled it, roughly folded the edge. My name had been written on the back in blue ink. Not in my mother's handwriting, not in anyone's I recognized. It didn't matter. I left it face down. The light hit the tabletop in a way that made the grain look like waves. I'd once traced those lines with my finger during a long call from the base, listening to Dad talk about gutters, about which branch of the family tree was planning a reunion, about gas prices. That day he'd paused and said, "You're lucky not to be tied down here." I didn't know what to say to that. No one mentioned my deployments at Thanksgiving. I lifted the letter and placed it flat again. No creases, no marks, just smooth precision. That's how it was done. No slamming doors, no confrontations, just signatures in quiet rooms, quiet filing drawers, quiet lives rearranged to exclude. I looked in the mirror after filing everything away, not to check my face, not to see if I looked angry, but to study the absence. The space I used to occupy had been edited out. No footnote, no asterisk, no room left to argue with. I didn't cry. I just stared. And realized I hadn't been erased. I'd been rewritten. I used to think silence meant defeat. Now, I understand it can be a closing door. I didn't call my mother. I didn't reply to the letter. I didn't ask anyone why. There was nothing in the language of that lawsuit that required interpretation. I wasn't confused. I was removed. I took 3 days before touching the box in the back of the closet. It was small, shoe-sized, with a tear in one corner and a strip of masking tape across the lid, where my name had once been written in faded Sharpie. Inside were the things I hadn't unpacked since the last move. A few dog-eared paperbacks, one with a cracked spine, a laminated bookmark from a base library, and a photograph of my room back home taken on the day I redeployed. The walls had been empty, the bed already stripped, but the corner bookshelf had still been full. I remembered the titles without looking. Emerson, Dickinson, the old field guide to northern birds. I drove back early one morning, not to talk, just to retrieve. The house was quiet when I pulled up, curtains drawn, porch light still on from the night before. I knocked once, waited, then again. A minute passed, another. No one opened the door. My phone buzzed in my pocket. "If you need anything, Claire, have your attorney reach out to ours." The message ended there. No greeting, no sign-off, no name. I stood on the porch for a long moment, not because I expected someone to change their mind, but because I wanted to remember the way the wood felt under my boots, the soft give of the third plank from the left, the scratch on the doorframe where Grant used to measure our height in pencil marks. The lock had been changed. That much was clear. I placed the spare key in the mailbox. No note. Just the key alone, catching a thread of morning light before I shut the lid. The books stayed where they were. Back at the apartment, I didn't turn on the lights. I sat on the floor with my back against the wall and listened to the refrigerator hum. My boots left faint impressions on the rug I hadn't vacuumed in 2 weeks. No one noticed I hadn't returned messages. Not the cousins, not the neighbors, not even the alumni group who usually reminded me to update my donation info every spring. I packed slowly. No ceremony, no sense of closure. Just one drawer at a time, shirts folded with precise lines, mugs wrapped in old t-shirts, files sealed without rereading. The lease ended in June. I didn't renew. There was a cabin 3 hours north I'd seen once, in passing pine boards, faded grey, single chimney. No internet, no name. It came furnished. The listing had called it modestly maintained. That felt appropriate. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. No forwarding address, no redirection notice. Just a mailbox left empty and a voicemail left full. The move took one trip, a rented truck, 2 duffels, 1 thermos of coffee I didn't drink. The cabin smelled like pine sap and old wood smoke. There was a kettle, a table, a narrow bed with a wool blanket and 1 drawer that stuck halfway shut. I didn't bring pictures. I didn't hang anything on the wall. The first night, I boiled water for tea and stared at the condensation forming on the window pane. The glass reflected me faintly, a blurred version in profile posture, still straight shoulders even. I locked the door myself. No one was on the other side. I stood at the window and watched my own shape settle into stillness. Not hidden, not waiting, just still. No messages came the next day, or the day after. I deleted the group thread from my phone. I unsubscribed from the family photo share. I let the calendar go blank. No one called to ask why. I found the key to the old house again, 2 weeks later, buried in the side pocket of my coat. I held it between 2 fingers, studied the weight of it. It had teeth too worn to fit any lock I now knew. I dropped it into the drawer beside the sink. The next day, I dropped it again this time, into the small metal box by the post office, wrapped in nothing. I didn't check to see if it arrived. The cabin door creaks when it closes. I let it. It's the only sound that reminds me something has ended. I drink my tea without sugar now, not because I like the taste better, but because sweetness feels ornamental. The mug I use is plain ceramic, chipped at the rim grey where the glaze thinned. I wash it carefully each night, dry it slowly, place it facing outward on the open shelf as if it's always ready, even if no one comes. I don't speak much these days, but not out of fear, not out of shame, just choice. Some exits don't need a farewell. Some answers only arrive once no one's listening, and some silences are not absence. They are presence, undisturbed. I never realized how much noise I had gotten used to until it was gone. Not just sound, but the kind that fills space without being noticed, questions that expect polite answers, clinking forks against plates, the low static of a television left on for company. The cabin is small. It came with nothing that speaks, which is a kind of kindness. The wood stove crackles the faucet, sputters the floor, shifts under my weight. Everything else stays still. I wake up early, not out of discipline, just habit. The mornings here come with a thin kind of light. I boil water over the stove slice, a piece of bread, eat standing. I don't open my phone. Most days I don't turn it on. The table creaks when I lean on it. The same table I've started using as a desk, a kitchen counter, a surface to sort through the last file I brought with me. The legal one, the one with my name at the top, and theirs printed as footnotes. I read through it, sometimes not to prepare, not to fight, just to understand the version of me that someone else had the power to write. No one knows I'm here. That helps. There's a chair by the window I sit in each afternoon. The cushion is flat, the arms slightly warped. But the view is clean. Rows of pine bark, flaking at the base at a line of ferns near the edge where the sunlight forgets to reach. I've never been someone who names birds, but one visits the branch outside the window every morning. Its head knocks against the wood. A rhythmic, solitary sound. I don't know what it's called. I still listen. At night, the air feels like it waits for something. I open the window anyway. Let it in. Let it fill the room. Let it press against my lungs the way voices used to. I write sometimes. Not letters, not emails, just thoughts. 1 page a night. A practice. A thread between days. Not because I'm trying to document anything, just to prove that I remain. The pen I use belonged to a commanding officer years ago. He left it behind after a strategy meeting and never asked for it back. It clicks with a stiffness I haven't fixed. Most of what I write is short. Observations. Fragments. Words like enough and again and still. Yesterday I wrote no one called, but no one promised to. I left the paper open on the desk, then turned it face down without rereading. There's a photograph on the mantel. It was tucked into one of the folders when I left. I didn't realize I packed it. In the image, I'm 7, standing beside Grant on the front lawn. Dad has his hand on his shoulder. Mom is adjusting his collar. I'm half-turned, squinting away from the camera, not smiling. That's the version they kept. That's the shape I took in their memory, half-present turned away, not asking for space. I haven't put the photo in a frame. I just let it rest against the wall. I've thought about burning it. I haven't. Not out of sentiment, just caution. I want to make sure I'm not doing it to be seen. I don't bring much inside. I keep the cabin sparse. A blanket folded at the end of the bed. 1 pot, 1 fork, 1 cup. The fewer objects, the fewer roles to remember. The sweater I wear most has 2 missing buttons and a thread pulled near the hem. It used to belong to someone else, I don't remember who. I keep wearing it. It fits loosely in the shoulders, tightly in the wrists. I like the contradiction. Some nights I count the number of days since I heard my name spoken aloud. Some nights I forget the sound of it altogether. There's no mailbox here. If anyone were to write the letter, wouldn't find me. That thought feels less like loss now, and more like relief. I don't pretend this is healing. I'm not rebuilding. I'm just still. That, I've decided, is enough for now. One morning, I heard something different. Not the bird, not the trees, a short rustle near the back step. I stood quietly, waited. A rabbit, I think. Maybe a fox. It didn't stay long, but it reminded me things still move around me even when I don't. That night, I boiled water a second time. Not out of need. Just for warmth. I stood by the window and watched the steam rise. I thought of my mother's hands always folding something. Napkins, shirts, conversations. I thought of Grant's voice clipped and certain. You've always needed everything spelled out. I thought of the quiet after Dad said, "This house doesn't run on guilt." None of it sounded recent. All of it still echoed. I didn't say anything back then. I don't need to now. I sat with the cup in both hands until it cooled. No fire, no epiphany, just one long exhale, and a silence that felt finally not like waiting, but arrival. Some doors don't close with sound. They close with silence, dressed as invitation. The email came during a storm, the kind that smudges the view and quiets everything except the roof. Harper Langley's name appeared in my inbox, still marked important, even though I hadn't tagged her that way. Claire, the family, would like to propose a resolution. A meeting has been suggested open to your availability. They hope to avoid further division. Please let me know. No apology, no acknowledgement of what had come before. Just the language of repairs made from the outside in. I stared at the message for a while. The rain tapped lightly against the glass, steady and without rhythm. I read it again slower the second time. The phrase, "avoid further division," caught the edge of my breath. It sounded like something you'd say about spilled paint, not about a name removed from property, a life redacted from memory. I didn't reply. That night, I found a short article on a local news site, buried near the bottom under high school sports and zoning disputes. Questions arise around Whitmore estate management. Legal disputes may delay. Upcoming auction of private art collection. The tone was neutral. The implications weren't. I closed the laptop without bookmarking the page. The next day, a message from Lauren came through. I hadn't blocked her. That felt too dramatic, too visible, but I hadn't expected contact either. Claire. This is exhausting everyone. Maybe it's time to let it go. You know how much the family name means. Let's not drag this out. No punctuation after my name. A full stop after let it go. I didn't respond to her either. A few days later, a padded envelope showed up at the post office box I hadn't told anyone about. No return address. Inside, a photograph printed on glossy paper. A recent family gathering staged in the garden behind the house. The hedges had been trimmed. The tablecloth matched the flower arrangements. The children smiled toward the lens, one holding a balloon shaped like a star. Lauren stood in the center, Grant beside her, arms folded. My parents sat near the front, their expressions even practiced. I wasn't in it. There wasn't even a space for me to be missing from. I placed the photo on the shelf next to the fireplace. Not framed, not torn, just standing. It leaned slightly to one side. The rain returned that night. I listened to it drip slowly through the gutter and imagined the conversation that had probably led to the email. She might say yes if it sounds formal. Don't admit anything. Just make it clear we're trying to be generous. I could hear my father's voice, low and deliberate. Let her know we're willing to move forward as long as she doesn't complicate things. And Lauren's too light to sound false. Tell her it's about unity. That's what she always wanted, isn't it? There was no mention of repair. No space for recognition. Only terms. When someone doesn't want you back, but wants back what you hold, it sounds like reconciliation. But it moves like strategy. The kettle clicked as it cooled. I poured a cup and watched the steam drift sideways. I didn't delete the messages. I didn't call anyone. There was no need. The name they offered to restore wasn't mine. It was a placeholder, a slot in a ledger that looked better, full. They hadn't returned because they missed me. They returned because my absence had become inconvenient. I drank the tea slowly bitter from steeping too long. I thought of the last time I'd seen them all in one room. The same arrangement, nearly the same poses. That time I had stood near the doorway waiting for someone to shift and make space. No one had. Not even me. Now, there was no doorway. No invitation. Just a courier envelope, a photograph, and a headline tucked into page 5. I picked up the photo again, looked at the way Lauren's hand rested on my mother's shoulder, the way Grant tilted slightly forward, the way no one seemed to be searching for anyone else. It was a finished picture. I set it back down. I didn't feel erased. I felt preserved in their version just enough to be remembered when useful. And that more than anything told me I had done the right thing by leaving. There's a kind of clarity that arrives only after someone asks for you, not because they miss you, but because their stage looks empty without the character they wrote out too soon. I stared through the window where the trees blurred against the sky, and I didn't answer. Not out of defiance, just because no reply is sometimes the clearest line you can draw. I used to think becoming different meant becoming someone new. Now I know it can mean becoming someone quiet. The job came from a neighbor's cousin. One of those connections passed along at the end of a conversation, not out of charity, but because the person listening didn't flinch when I said I didn't want anything long-term. Just someone who knows systems and keeps things clean. Not a lot of oversight. That was enough. The university didn't ask questions. No mention of headlines. No need for references from people I no longer spoke to. I showed up, kept to myself, reviewed firewall reports and updated protocols. My desk overlooked a side alley where delivery trucks backed in slowly, and no one bothered me unless something broke. I brought my own mug. It had no logo, no phrase, just grey ceramic and a chip near the rim where it had slipped once years ago from a counter I no longer remember. I started going to the small market near the county road every Friday, a basket, not a cart. Greens, eggs, whatever loaf of bread didn't have too much sugar. I greeted the woman at the register, handed over cash, took my change. No one there called me by name, and I never offered one. The dog wasn't planned. She showed up on the edge of the woods one morning, small, skittish, missing a tag. I left food on the step. She returned the next day. Eventually, she stayed. I called her Fern, though I never said it out loud. Only once, maybe when I opened the door and she didn't follow right away. She slept near the fireplace, close, but not too close, like she understood something about the way I stood still for too long. I planted lettuce in 2 old crates and lined them along the window where the light hit most. They grew slowly. I didn't mind. I wasn't measuring anymore. Samantha Rowe, who owned the cafe near the post office, stopped by once a week with leftover apple tarts. "You don't have to say yes," she said once, holding the tin out without looking me in the eye. I took it anyway. The third time she came, I opened the door before she knocked. "Just in case you were hungry," she said. I said, "Thank you," before I could think about it. She didn't reply. She just smiled, small, as if to say that was enough. I stopped checking the mailbox every day. At first it had been habit, then hope, then nothing. Now I checked it when I needed stamps. The rest could wait. Inside, things settled. I rehung a painting I'd carried from Syria, not because it meant anything to anyone else, but because, for the first time, it felt like it belonged in my space, not as proof of what I'd done, but as colour against the wall. I kept a broken clock on the shelf, not for time. The hands didn't move. The glass had cracked years ago in a box labelled Grant's Things. No one had claimed it, so I kept it. The minute hand had snapped off. I turned it once into a paperweight. It sat next to the folder of university passwords and a list of seed types I wanted to try in spring. Sometimes I looked at it and thought, even broken things can still hold weight. I no longer listened for the phone. I didn't flinch when the screen lit up. Most days it didn't. When it did, it was the vet confirming Fern's appointment or a student asking if the server was down. Nothing that required pretending. I didn't think about what anyone might say if they saw me now. I didn't need a new story. I didn't need a correction. I needed silence, and I had it. One evening, I opened the drawer where I kept old photos. A small box, mostly yellowed prints, bent corners, some with writing on the back. I found one of me at 12, standing near a river jacket, two big eyes half closed. Grant stood beside me, one hand raised as if waving, though I don't remember who was behind the camera. I studied it, not to remember, but to recognize. Then I pulled the frame from the mantel, the one that had held the same picture since I moved in, the only one I hadn't touched. I removed the old photo and placed a new one inside, a shot of the woods behind the cabin taken during the first snow. Fern just a blur of motion in the corner, bark halfway open. No people, no performance, just trees. And a season I hadn't expected to outlast. I set the frame back down. The corners fit better than they had before. Somewhere inside the wall the pipes creaked. I didn't move. I listened not for meaning, just to know I was still here. And I thought not with certainty, not with regret, just quiet recognition. I've changed, and no one needs to say it out loud for it to be true. I once thought closure was something that arrived. A knock, a conversation, a shift in someone's tone. But it turns out closure is what you give yourself when nothing is coming. The letter took 1 page. I used a pen with a fine tip and ran out of ink halfway through the last sentence. I didn't switch pens. I pressed harder instead. The paper buckled slightly under the pressure, as if it understood the weight of the words. I hereby renounce any and all legal, financial, and symbolic claim to the Whitmore Family Trust. I retain the surname, not for lineage, but for survival. It is not theirs anymore. It is mine, because I carried it through war zones, through hospitals, through silence. That will be enough. I folded it 3 times and placed it into a blank envelope. No return address, no wassil, no note attached. Just my name once more, written in the corner like a period at the end of a sentence. The rest of the papers, the case filings, the notices, the certified mail receipts had lived too long in a file folder I kept behind the stove. I opened it one last time, not to read, but to confirm nothing inside had changed since I last looked. The courthouse wasn't far. I walked. I wanted the distance. I wanted the steps to count. The air was wet and heavy, the kind that warns of rain without needing to deliver it. I didn't bring an umbrella. I wore a coat with frayed seams and a collar that never stayed up. The inside pocket held the letter. At the security checkpoint, a man scanned my ID and returned it without looking at my face. I passed through a narrow hallway lined with empty benches. The floor squeaked in a rhythm that sounded like hesitation. At the records office, I handed over the envelope. The clerk took it with a nod, checked the contents, and stamped a single page without comment. The date was clean in red ink. No questions. No comments. No delay. She slid a copy of the receipt toward me across the counter. "This finalizes your withdrawal," she said. "There will be no further correspondence." The words hung in the air for a moment, formal and distant. I nodded, took the paper, and folded it once before placing it inside my coat. No one followed me out. Outside, the drizzle had thickened into something steadier. Not a storm, just water deciding to stay. I stood under the narrow ledge by the entrance, watching the sidewalk shine. A car passed tires whispering through puddles. A woman across the street adjusted her scarf. The traffic light blinked between colors with no urgency. I stepped out from the overhang and let the rain land freely. It soaked into the shoulders of my coat and pressed the fabric closer to my skin. The collar sagged, finally giving in. There was something about the weight of it I welcomed. No performance, no approval, just the body and the weather agreeing to exist at the same time. At the edge of the square, a wooden bench waited beneath a crooked maple tree. I sat and let the box rest beside me, the cedar one I had used to store everything from the case. It still held the faint scent of dust and old paper. I didn't open it. I lifted the lid just enough to slide in the stamped receipt, then shut it with both hands. A small click. The sound of something done. I left it there on the bench. No label, no message, no ownership. Someone would find it. Or no one would. I kept walking. There was a narrow street just past the courthouse, one I had never taken. A quiet road with only 3 storefronts, an antique dealer, a closed florist, and a small brick building with a wooden sign above the door. The paint had worn thin, but the words remained Sentinel Foundation, Veterans Advocacy Office. The windows were clean. There were no flyers, no slogans, just the door, dark green, slightly ajar, as if the wind had nudged it once and it never quite closed again. I stopped in front of it. I read the sign again slowly, each letter carved and imperfect. The word Sentinel had been filled in twice, once in black, then again in faded navy, like someone had tried to make it stand out, but changed their mind halfway. I stood there for a long moment, my coat still dripping, my shoes leaving faint prints on the brick. I had nothing in my hands, no file, no request, no case, and for the first time that felt right, no one inside was waiting for me. No one there knew what I had left behind, what I had carried, what I had unclaimed. But they didn't have to. I reached for the door not out of need, but because standing still no longer felt like a form of control. The handle was cool, worn smooth at the top, where countless hands had landed before mine. I didn't grip it tightly. I just touched it. The wood didn't creak when I pushed. The door opened quietly, not as an entrance, not as a return, but As a beginning, I didn't need to explain. And I thought not with triumph, not with grief, only with calm, I didn't close the door behind me. Because I didn't have to. I used to think I needed someone to witness my life in order for it to feel real. But now, I know presence doesn't need applause. It just needs airtime and enough stillness to grow into itself. The steam rose from the kettle in soft ribbons. I let it drift unbroken until it disappeared just above eye level. The scent of bergamot reached me slowly. I poured the tea into the same cup I always used, white porcelain hairline crack, running from lip to base. I turned the crack away from my mouth, though it hadn't leaked in years. The morning sat quietly across the cabin. No blinking notifications, no long subject lines, no names I didn't want to see. The table was clean, except for a linen napkin folded once, and the small cloth-bound journal I hadn't touched in weeks. The last page was still blank. The pen beside it had dried in the cap. I didn't replace it. There was nothing left I needed to say to paper. Next to the window, the tin box waited. I pulled it down gently, fingers brushing the dust from its lid. Inside were the letters I never sent. Some addressed, some not. Some written in anger, others in something softer. I didn't unfold them. I didn't check dates. I closed the lid again and placed it back on the top shelf, high enough to be out of sight, low enough not to pretend it never existed. I moved slower now, but not because I was tired. I moved slowly because I no longer rushed toward validation. I wasn't scanning the silence for evidence that someone missed me. It had been 3 weeks since I dreamed of the house on Langley Avenue. I used to revisit it nightly, hallways, dimly lit voices behind doors, lights never turned off all the way. I'd walk barefoot through rooms that didn't hold me. I'd open cabinets to find them empty. Those dreams stopped. I didn't mark their end. I just noticed one day that I hadn't woken with the taste of disappointment in my mouth. I hadn't opened the legal folder in over a month. It sat undisturbed in the second drawer beneath my spare socks. Not because I feared what was in it, but because I no longer needed to reread the terms under which I was dismissed. The facts hadn't changed, only their place in my body. I kept the name, not because it brought comfort, but because I had dragged it with me through checkpoints, courtrooms, and clinics, through dust storms and family dinners and closed doors. It no longer belonged to them. It belonged to me. The mark on my inner wrist, just a small ink dot, had begun to fade. I hadn't touched it since the first year I came home. Back then, it was supposed to be a reminder. You're still here. You're still breathing. Now it was something else. Not a message, not a signal. Just part of me. I boiled the tea water again, though I didn't need a second cup. I liked the sound. At the bottom of the mail pile was a thin envelope from the Sentinel Foundation. No return label, no official seal, just my name typed cleanly in the center. Inside was 1 page. Ms. Whitmore, thank you for the data you submitted earlier this spring. Your report helped us confirm 3 fraudulent claims tied to defunct military benefits. Quiet work matters. Please know it's made a difference. There was no request for more, no signature, just a typed line of gratitude and the absence of assumption. I folded the letter carefully and slid it beneath a smooth stone I kept on the windowsill. The stone was flat, cool, the color of ash. I didn't know where it came from, only that I'd picked it up during a walk and never set it down again. The curtain moved beside me, pushed by a breeze that hadn't announced itself. The fabric was stitched from shrap remnants of shirts, old tablecloths, a hem that never sat straight. I had sewn it by hand years ago, when I still thought quiet would feel empty. Now it danced in the wind, flawed and full of motion. On the windowsill stood a white ceramic vase. One branch of lavender, dried and colourless, leaned slightly to the left. I had meant to replace it, but never did. Its scent had long since disappeared, but its shape remained a reminder that something can hold without blooming. I didn't reach for it. I watched the way the light softened around its edge, the way the curtain curled just enough to touch the base. There had been a time when I waited for apologies, then a time when I rehearsed what I would say if they ever arrived. Now, the silence no longer asked for interpretation. There had been a time when I thought survival was the prelude to something bigger, that letting go was the middle, and something bold had to follow. But I see now that nothing else is coming. And that's the point. I am not rebuilding anything. There are no grand blueprints, no symbolic milestones, no speeches to mark the shift. I folded the napkin once more and placed it beside the cup. I opened the window just enough to let the breeze in. It carried with it the scent of wet bark, something green, and nothing else. And I thought not to write it down, not to share, not to prove I'm not rebuilding a life, I'm living one. That's enough.